10 years ago, when I started investing in real estate, I thought single family houses were the best way to build wealth in real estate until I realized I was doing it the hard way. I built a portfolio of 40 houses and I thought I was crushing it. And then I bought one apartment complex and it completely doubled my portfolio overnight. So if you're grinding away on houses like I was, I want to show you why multifamily can get you much further, faster, and with way less headache. You see, I wanted out of my day job so badly, so I decided real estate was going to be my escape hatch. And I read all the books, I listened to all the podcasts, and I went all in. I started buying properties in my local market of Little Rock, Arkansas. And so for about 3 or 4 years, I was buying one house a month. So I'd work during my lunch hours, I'd make calls on my commute home, I'd stay up late writing offers, and I would spend my weekends driving around looking at properties in 3 different counties in my area. I set up several different LLCs, I was managing lots of rehabs, I tested multiple property managers, and I had 40 different mortgage payments, I had 40 sets of tax and insurance bills, and then 40 roofs to manage. Then one day, a real estate investor friend of mine, who actually lived in New Zealand of all places, asked me to help check out a triplex that he was buying in my backyard in Little Rock. So I went and took pictures, I told him about the area, and then he ended up buying this amazing deal. And that's when I thought, bro, like, wait a minute. Why am I not buying more of these 3 or 4, 5, 10 unit properties myself? So the next property, I went and looked and I found a 6-unit property. And you know what? It was the same amount of work as buying that one single family house. But instead of just having one tenant, I now had 6. I had only one mortgage and I had one tax bill and one roof to manage. And from that point on, I was hooked. The very next deal I bought was a 50-unit property. And I was able to buy these properties using the same creative financing techniques that I'd been using and I'd learned about on houses using very little of my own cash and also creating lots of cash flow. And that's how I discovered multifamily is the single fastest way for ordinary investors to hit major financial freedom super quickly. And so what I realized was that the sweet spot is between 5 and 50 units. They're above this residential threshold of 1 to 4 units, which is, considered residential, but below the radar of these big institutional buyers. Anything above 50 is kind of what they do, and anything below 50 is too small. And I found that the typical owners of these 5 to 50 units are typically older landlords and they're ready to retire. Many of them live out of state from their property. They've owned the property for 10 or 20 years, and so they often have little to no debt, which makes them absolutely perfect candidates for seller financing and my absolute favorite way to buy properties. And so now after owning a portfolio of 40 plus single family properties, I found that apartments are also much easier to manage. All the tenants are all in the same place, and it's easier to find professional grade property managers when you're doing commercial properties. And another advantage is that the units are very similar, if not identical to each other. So I know with absolute certainty what the going market rent is for a specific unit because I have a half dozen other units just like it. So it helps me kind of dial in what the market rents are and what it costs to make repairs. And this means more doors with way less effort. Now on the flip side, with single family, each property has its own unique paint color. It has a separate HVAC unit. The different configurations per property gets confusing, and it makes it really hard to scale. And so if your goal is to make $10,000 to $20,000 per month, and it should be, then you're going to need 50 to 100 units. And man, let me tell you, I've personally tried, and it takes a long time to accumulate a portfolio of 100 rentals, buying one property at a time. And the good news is you can build that size portfolio with just 1 or 2 transactions with apartments. And it's not just me. Barry used this same approach, and he bought 34 units in 6 months. He had only purchased 2 or 3 single family properties before, and he discovered the same challenge. He needed more units. So he started marketing to find these deals using a system that I'm about to break down for you. And one of those deals was 100% financed, meaning there was no money that came out of his pocket. So let's break down the steps to get started finding these deals for yourself. So step number 1 is mindset. You're not buying a roof, you're buying a business. So you want to step into the identity of an investor who knows how to find good deals. So you want to think of these properties as little black boxes, basically cash in, cash out. You don't want to fall in love with the property. And I notice a lot of new investors get really wrapped up into the idea of how nice the property is. Would I want to live there? They kind of picture themselves in that property. And do those pictures look nice? Dude, we want to provide clean, affordable, secure housing, but you're not going to be living there. This is our product, and we want our product to create cash. Clean, affordable, secure housing. So what you're doing is you're buying a small business based around real estate, and all you're doing is renting rectangles. Now, once you've got your mindset straight, we want to focus on step number 2, which is to find the right market and asset. You want to look for areas with solid population growth, good jobs, and a strong rental demand. And we like to focus on secondary and tertiary markets instead of expensive metros like Dallas, Atlanta, Nashville, really big cities like that. Instead, we target little satellite cities that are around it, like Denton, Texas, or Chattanooga, Tennessee, which is near Atlanta, or Murfreesboro, Tennessee, that surround these larger markets. So what you do is you take your metro area and then you draw concentric circles around it until you find where it's affordable. You want to stay out of really high crime areas, but you want to stay just below the super affluent neighborhoods. And so this is the working middle class, and that's the sweet spot where the numbers tend to work best. And by the way, if you want a resource on how to pick the right market and a shortcut in like months of trial and effort, you can grab a free guide that I made that I put inside of our school community, and you can find that link in the description below. Okay, step number 3 is where we do deal analysis. And this is where most beginners get a little intimidated by the math, but it's actually quite simple. And we use what I call the 5-minute mastery method. We want just a quick back the napkin analysis to see if this is a good deal or not. And here's how it works. We take revenue minus expenses, and this equals the NOI, the net operating income. You can think of this as like the net income from a business, sometimes referred to in a business sense as EBITDA. But in the context of commercial real estate, we just refer to that as NOI. And so this is basically the net operating income, the money the property produces before debt. Then with that, you determine what the cap rate is, which is how you compare the rate of return between different properties. And then you want to determine the cash flow, and then your ROI, which is return on investment. How much cash does your cash give you? And that's it. You don't need a finance degree. You just need some really basic numbers to see if it makes sense. So this is best with an example. So let's just do this 8-unit example that I recently did in my own business. So here's this 8-unit property. The seller wants $750,000 for it. Property rents for $900 per unit per month, which gives us a total of $7,200 per month, or a total of $86,000 per year. And that's the revenue number. Now we take the revenue number and then we multiply it times the expense ratios. And so we use 5% vacancy and a 45% expense ratio. And this is very common amongst multifamily properties, that it costs about 5% of vacancy just to, because you're turning properties over every so often. And then it costs about 45% of collected rent to operate the property. And so a very cool trick we do is we just do 1 minus times 1 minus. So that gives us this 86,000 from up here, remember, 86,000 per year times 0.95 times 0.55. This is 1 minus 5% and 1 minus 45%. And this gives us about $45,000 of NOI per year. So here's the good news on this deal. This seller will do seller financing. So they will take a 25% down payment. And they'll also accept principal-only payments on that installment payment, and will give us a 5-year balloon. So the good news here is we have to come up with about $187,000, but we're doing it at 0% interest, because the payment we're going to make is going to be $700 per month, and that's all principal. So you're putting $187,000 down, but then every month you're paying $700, and every bit of that is paying down your debt. So this means that we're actually growing our equity very fast. And once you account for expenses, this works out to be about $3,000 per month of net income. So we've negotiated and found a really good deal, and that's how ordinary people can grow serious wealth very quickly without having to wait 30 years for a mortgage to pay off. And that takes us back to step number 4, which is to make offers. And so now that you know how to find and analyze deals, your next step is to submit written offers to brokers and sellers. And a lot of new investors get really hung up here. They're afraid to commit to making offers. So it's kind of like asking someone out on a date. You kind of nerve wracking. You might get rejected, right? But if you don't shoot your shot, you're not going to score. So commit to submitting at least one written offer every single week. Then over time, you'll get much more comfortable. You kind of find your way, and then you'll be able to get to a point where you're submitting sometimes as many as one offer per day. And the secret to success in this business is to just make a lot of offers. You want to talk to as many sellers and brokers as possible and submit actual written out offers and then follow up on them over time. So one thing I can guarantee is that you'll never buy real estate if you don't make offers. And we've actually built a tool that helps you write these offers very quickly, and it does all the math for you. You can learn about that in our school community. That link's in the description. Now, step 5 is to seal the deal and get paid. So after submitting a lot of offers, you'll start finding sellers who are ready to do a deal, which is really exciting. This is when you get a purchase and sale agreement called a PSA, purchase and sale agreement. And once you have the property under contract, we call it under contract, you'll start to perform your due diligence on that property. And so during that, you'll audit the seller's financials, you'll do a physical inspection of the property to make sure there's not any surprises, and then you'll build your capital stack. What do I mean by that? Well, because I know you're wondering, where is all this money coming from? Let me walk you through that. We can either wholesale the deal to a third party for a fee called an assignment fee, or you can raise capital. So let's actually go back to our example we had here for our 8 unit, and they basically said that they will finance 75% of this for us, right? And this remaining 25%, which works out to be about $187,000, we need to come up with. Where is this coming from? And it'd be nice if you just had the cash yourself, but what happens if you're just light about $187,000? What does one do, okay? Well, you have a couple options. One, you can bring in a private money lender, or you can do a JV. You can pool some money together and do what they call a syndication, but this is a fairly small deal. So let's talk about doing a JV. So remember, this whole thing is creating $3,000 of profit per month. So what if you said, hey, if you have $187,000, I'll split this with you, and you can make $1,500 and I can make $1,500. And so whatever we make, I split with you, and you bring the money, I found the deal, and I'll do the property management, the asset management, and we'll just make decisions together to make sure you're comfortable with everything. But that 187 will give you $1,500 per month. Now, in this case, you're still making $1,500 a month too of cash flow, and you have no money in the deal. And you're getting rewarded for finding and negotiating and analyzing a deal with seller financing. Now, you've added an 8 unit to your portfolio, no money out of your pocket, and you're making $1,500 a month, not to mention the future value of this property you're building over time. You see, houses are fine if you just want to dabble in real estate, but imagine how much time and effort it's going to take to find a similar deal like this on 8 different single-family houses. Instead, let's try to do this again on a 20-unit apartment complex with a similar structure. So if you want to build serious financial freedom and you want to do it faster, multifamily is the game that actually scales. You can grab all the free resources mentioned in this video, and I want to help you get started on your first commercial deal. So grab that link in the description below. And just so you know, right now is one of the best times to get started. So you can watch this video right here where I explain why real estate is officially on easy mode.